I thought I would just read a little bit from my manuscript. I actually had a bunch of projects that I was working on in the sabbatical, and that was very exciting. The biggest one I was working on was this full-length manuscript that I put together. It's now out in the mail, so I thought I would read a few pieces from that. But I also had a couple of other projects that I was working on. It's basically 3 separate projects I have going, had going during my sabbatical, not including my exciting trip to Australia, which was going to be another presentation, but I was asked to just do one presentation. So if you want to hear about Australia, I'll tell you about it. I translated a play and we put it on in Australia, and it was definitely exciting. So if you want to hear about that, I can talk about that later. But I thought I would just read a little bit from, first from the complete manuscript that is currently circulating, and then a little bit from a couple of projects that I have in process. And I'm trying to read, I've tried to pull some new pieces because this manuscript has been in process for like 5 years. So some of you have heard poems from that manuscript before, but I tried to pull ones that you probably hadn't heard. And this first one is called In Stone. And I'm going to read, actually, the manuscript has a large influence of Bulgaria. I spend a lot of time in Bulgaria. It also has a lot of themes of immigration running through it. So I thought I would read a couple of those poems. And this one's called In Stone. 1. In the center of the city sits a monument from the communist 1980s. Several dozen rocks the size of books suspended within an iron wire cage. The rocks cannot move, piled on top of one another, filling the cage, which raises the issue of the freedom of rocks, their right to tumble downward. What if they object to being torn off of mountains and dragged here, unable to follow their own destiny out in the sunlight of a field, deep in the wetness of a cavern? Stop throwing rocks, a little boy's mother yells across the square. 2. A woman stands up to her breasts in the pit. Several yards away, a pile of stones is warming in the sunlight. Someone dug the pit. Someone searched out stones of the right girth and mass, set them carefully in that pile like a small mountain. I know you've seen this before. The rocks will not resist being thrown. 3. On the side of the graveyard road, a row of tombstones, some carved illegibly, others blank-faced and smooth. Why they are here, no one can say. Were they once marking the head and foot of a corpse, moved aside when the road came through? Were they stacked here unneeded, the leftovers of the engraver, his damaged goods? The stones aren't talking. They wait quiet as old women who have seen too much, their wild hair smoothed down by centuries of rain. This next poem is about my husband's grandmother, Kalina, for whom my daughter is named, and it's called Family History. 1. My grandmother was a bird in Thessaloniki. She flew through open windows. She built nests over the bare heads of her village. No one could touch a feather. Until her father sat at the table with a stranger, a bottle of rakia between them, and let the stranger trap her in a basket, all darkness. Twice she slipped the lid open and flew home. The 3rd time, the man clipped her wings, tied her talon to the saddle. She remembered Persephone, who didn't want to die, Eurydice, who didn't want to come back to life, or was it the other way around? She cooked his meals, washed road dust from his shirts, raised 4 children, screech softening. No one guessed that 2 of the children had been born with feathers on their backs. 2. Too many details are missing. For instance, what type of bird, the color of her feathers. For instance, the direction of the wind, the length of her shadow. Was it summer? Was the moon full? What her mother said when she flew back home, slipping through the open window. And which window? The kitchen or the bedroom where her sister slept? what her father said to the man when he made her go. For instance, a songbird or a bird of prey. For instance, a crow. I say she was a raven who swallowed the world's light and coughed it out into the sun and moon. I say her father was the thief who locked the light in a tiny box, locked within other boxes, each bigger than the last, until they contained the world. I say the marriage was her punishment for breaking them open, one by one, feathers rising and falling, wings, all starlight beneath the lids. And this one's called The Third War. It's actually the first poem in the collection. I'm not sure I might move it, but it's a prose poem. The Third War was for the words, written, spoken, whispered. It started with wealthy word lovers buying a few special items at a time, words that wouldn't be missed much, like autothaumaturgist and vitilitigation, words one could enjoy rolling around in the mouth for days on end. Articles and prepositions were completely off limits, and the intent was not to impact the habits of daily grammar, but simply to possess something rare and beautiful, like a painting or a sculpture. But as the rare words disappeared, people began to worry that their children wouldn't be able to speak in complete sentences. Those with the means bought up words by the hundreds. For those without money, the world grew silent. Anyone caught using a word she didn't own was arrested and held in custody. Anyone caught writing one was imprisoned indefinitely. People hummed songs without lyrics and spoke by drawing pictures in the air with their hands. The children would point and indicate curiosity when they heard some lucky passerby proclaim what she owned. Chariot, xylophone. The parents shook their heads sharply, afraid to describe the hard-edged consonants, open-mouth vowels, L's thin as blades of grass. No one dared to mention the shapes of sentences, the way the words hooked together into rhythms and curses, dishwater installation instructions, and marriage announcements. Anyway, it was hard to remember without the words to remind them. Ugh, they grunted, thinking of all the books they had ever loved, the conversations rolling for hours through the open windows, a thing they once called moonlight, laughing all night on the writer's fingers. Let's see. What else is interesting here that you guys haven't heard? I don't think I've read this one before. It's called Immigrant. Forget Hollywood, private homes the size of theaters, swimming pools scooped into every backyard, inalienable rights. If you visit those houses, it will be to mop up vast expanses of marble floors or blow leaves from the pool deck. Forget blonde girls who live there, shining like small suns against a blue sky. Surfer boys with more muscles than all the village combined. Forget the village. Its dust will never choke you again, kicking down the dull roads, leading home to your parents. Forget your parents. This is easy. You send them $200 a month, enough for a year, instead of answers to their questions about the grandkids. Forget the grandkids, your children who speak to you in their native tongue, who refuse to speak to you in their native tongue and laugh at the way you say sheet, which sounds like shit. They have no idea who you were. Forget who you were. Doctor, actress, teacher, saint, someone with a name no one here can pronounce. That old life itching like a phantom limb or lost city. Even when you save up enough cash and vacation days to make the trip back, it isn't where you left it. And I think I will move into, it's here. Another series of poems that I've been working on. They're all entitled Dear White, and they're part of a larger collection. I've read a number of the poems from that collection before. They have to do with my growing up in Atlanta in a very racist society. I was part of a busing system. A lot of African American kids from poor neighborhoods were bused into my school. And I found out recently that Natasha Trethewey, who was just our poet laureate, was actually one of the kids who was bused into a school in my neighborhood. I never actually met her as a kid, but So the whole collection is sort of about growing up in this racist culture and what I did with it as a child and what I'm trying to do with it as an adult. And the deeper I got into writing about race, the more crazy the whole thing seemed. And I took this different angle and I started writing these poems, Dear White. And this is a video poem that I made. This was published on Alaska Quarterly Review's YouTube website, and it's also in their journal. So I thought I would play this, and then I'll read a couple others from that group. Dear White, how white my sheets are, my pages, my shirts, my hydrangeas. If I had a dog, it would be white. A rhino, the endangered ones. Also a cat, rat, and fine-tooth comb. Even my house is white. My car, my eyeballs. I wear you everywhere I go. I pull you out of my sleeve like a lottery ticket with the winning numbers. Every time this happens, I scream, hallelujah, God bless me. Sorry. The quality of my filmmaking is not the best, but it's fun. It's something fun for me. I actually used to make a lot more of them, and then video poems has become this kind of serious thing with filmmakers team up with poets, and so it's been kind of taken over by professionals. So
I want to introduce you to, if you haven't yet.
Sorry. I guess that's the next in the Alaska Quarterly Review website series. But I thought I would read a couple more poems from the Dear White series. Dear White, I was born with sunscreen smeared across my legs. Arms so white, they smelled like marshmallow cream. I was so pale, the teacher sent me home sick every day. No, my mother told her when she came to pick me up. She's just white. When I stand at the white wall, you see nothing but my eyes. When I stand against the sky, you think I'm clouds. And maybe I am. So full of nothing, I float clear into the blue. Dear White, are you a wall or a statement? A fence or a pillory? A blank slate or a street stamped in snow? I love the way you glow. Point your headlamp in my direction. Feel my forehead and pronounce me living. Lick my labels and label me perfected. Shatter me beneath your heel and stick me together again with glue. Make me whole. Here's another poem from that series. It's called Southern Gothic. Sometimes the moss in a tree is just moss. Sometimes it is a body swinging from a rope. How you tell the difference is by getting close enough to see, by waiting for the sun to rise high enough to clear off the shadows stuck to your own feet. The boy was just a boy, not a big-eyed monster. The river was cold, and the wind colder. This is how it works. I hit you, and you scream. This is how it plays out. I wring you like a dishcloth, and the truth gushes forth. The only truth that will make it out of here alive. And then I thought finally I would read a little bit from my most recent project that I'm still sort of in the middle of, that I also spent a lot of time working on during my sabbatical. As I continued to write about race, I started to get really interested in sort of the origins of racism and the racist system, and I went back, started reading a lot of primary source documents dealing with race, and then I sort of started reading a lot of diaries and letters from plantation women, and reading about their relationships with slaves and about their perspectives on racism, which is bizarre and fascinating. I think I recently went to Monticello with my family, which was really wonderful and interesting. But one of the things that struck me in a tour that I was on, one of the guides was talking about Jefferson and his the way that he owned slaves and his views on slavery. And there's a lot in Jefferson's writings to suggest that he knew better. You know, he was a logical, enlightened human being. Of course, he knew better than to own other human beings, but that he chose lifestyle over principle often. And so it's amazing to me what we can convince ourselves to believe and what we can convince ourselves is okay, often in the name of lifestyle. And this resonated with me because I think we do this all the time. All of us in privileged society are constantly benefiting from others' suffering, though we justify it and separate ourselves from it in a variety of ways. So I guess I found myself, as I was getting into these plantation women's diaries, and I don't know if this will come across in the few that I'm going to read, but I found myself relating a lot of times, unfortunately, to their position. And I found myself trying not to judge as much as to understand, and how does this happen? How does a whole society convince themselves of something that is so clearly unjust and irrational and sort of ridiculous? But one of the things you have to confront if you're going to write about race and white women and race is the rape of the slaves, and the fact that a lot of women knew to some extent that it was going on, and they dealt with it in different ways in their families. But this poem is called What Our Mothers Don't Tell Us, and it has a quote from Mary Chestnut's A Diary from Dixie, 1861. Mary Chestnut writes, "You say there are no more fallen women on a plantation than in London in proportion to numbers. But what do you say to this? To a magnate who runs a hideous black harem with his consequences under the same roof with his lovely wife and his beautifully accomplished daughters." What our mothers don't tell us. The path from the main house to the slave quarters needs no trimming. We have more sisters than sit here with us after supper in the parlor knitting. We do not wait for our father's return. Our own marriageable age, moving toward us slowly like a tide up the river banks. We will not see it coming until the cornfield is flooded with salt. This is called Gagging Iron. You guys know what a gagging iron is? It was actually used originally in early modern, or I don't know, probably not originally, but it was famously used in early modern England to keep women quiet when they talked too much or when they got in trouble as gossips. They would put this thing called a gagging iron on them. It was this metal thing that locked behind. It has this, it's kind of a horrible contraption. It was used often in slave societies. Gagging iron, 1. Who cannot speak the iron collar. Do you guys, do I need to wrap it up because we were really late getting started and I was told I could have a few more minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Should I, are we behind, are we behind schedule? Should we?
I think we're behind schedule.
We can just, okay.
We're 10 minutes behind schedule, so you should probably have 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gagging iron, 1. Who cannot speak the iron collar cupped under chin to catch drool? Who cannot eat master's food while cooking it, fastened behind a neck, pronged to hold a tongue, or drink, but wet sweat drips in the hot kitchen? Who cannot say what made the bird fly against the window glass until it broke? 2. Someone built the blast furnace, smelted the ore into pig iron, puddled the pig iron, forged the bar iron into a collar. Someone fashioned the lock at the back, the cup beneath the chin, the barbs to pin the tongue in place. Someone made the small holes for breathing. Let's see. I'm sorry. I did that many times. I was working on this series. Sorry, I didn't mean to be a downer. Then I started, like, the more I got into this project, the more things started to disintegrate for me. So, like, the words just kind of started to move across the page, and I started to respond to some of the language that I was reading more directly. And this is called Dream of Freedom. And it's got this quote from a novel by Mary Herndon called Louise Elton, written in 1853. It was one of a lot of novels that were written in response to Uncle Tom's Cabin. A lot of Southern women wrote pro-slavery novels in response to Harriet Beecher Stowe's work. And the quote is, "Freedom amongst Negroes is just as useless as razors among children. In the hand, a bath, smelling salts, metal in the mouth, at the throat, the sharp sting of freedom on the tongue, silence. The naked flesh, broken nail. In the mirror, a brown hand clasps something I cannot see. The child's face is wet. His hand hides a blade. He wants to play. He calls me to the door. In the mirror, a flash of freedom. A white form deflated in the tub. The red bricks caving in upon themselves. Fields gone to seed. The South shaved clean." Let's see, I just want to read maybe one more. I guess we're getting kind of late. I'll just read this last one. It's called daguerreotype, which is, the daguerreotype is the sort of primitive form, the early form of photography. And it has a quote from Mary Pringle in Charleston, South Carolina, 1868. So this is after the end of the Civil War. And she says, "The whole family were in a whirl of excitement yesterday. The information was circulated that the photographer was to be before the old house at 8:30. The man travels with a box, and from it emerges a likeness, fixed by exposure to light on a silver plate. We sat changeless for several minutes in the sunlight. In this way obtained an exact copy of ourselves, frozen now in the year 1868. The thin wisps of my hair cutting the sides of my face. In 100 years, we will still be fixed in this same position. New eyes will gaze upon us. They will want to ask us uncountable questions, and we will not be able to speak." Thank you, guys. No time for questions.